Hey everybody, it's Kate, the West Coast Paper Crafter, and you are joining me for my third and final project in my Potions and Spells card class at home series. I'm going to show you how to make this very cute Halloween treat box that you can stuff full of goodies. So for this project, I'll be using the Potion and Spells stamp set and the Potion and Spells dies. And I'm also going to be using a banner die from the Happy Little Things die set as well. So if you don't have these items, then just use whatever you have in your stash. All right, I will go through all the measurements before we get started. And if you are watching this on Facebook, you're going to find the measurements in a photo comment. And if you're watching on YouTube, all the measurements and supplies will be in the description of the video. And you do need your paper trimmer to create this project as well. Okay, so to start off, I've got a piece of gorgeous grape cardstock, a full sheet. So this is 8.5 by 11. And I've cut out some designer series paper from the Flowering Zinnias designer series paper pack. These pieces are 3.25 by 4, and these are 1.5 by 4. And I've got a little piece of gorgeous grape that's 3 by 3.75. I'm just going to put this out of the way for now, and we're going to work on building our box. So grab your paper trimmer, and we'll start on the 8.5 inch side. So we're just scoring right now, we're not cutting. Your first score line on the 8.5 inch side is going to be 1 3/4. All right, 1 3/4. Next, we're going to score at 6, and then our final score line on this side will be 7 3/4. Okay, so we've got our first score at 1 3/4, then at 6, and then 7 3/4. All right, flip your paper around to the 11 inch side, and we're going to score at 1 3/4, 5 1/4, 7, and finally at 10.5. All right, so let's go through that again. On the 11 inch side, 1 3/4, 5 1/4, 7, 10.5. All right, I'm going to get my paper trimmer out of the way. And now we're going to cut into these score lines. So I've made a little diagram here, so I know exactly where to cut and where to fold. So you may want to just pause this video and take a screenshot for future reference, but I'm going to use this because there's lots of different cuts in this paper, and some are cut up to score lines and some pieces are going to be cut right out. So on my template, anything that's dotted lines, that's where I'm cutting. So this little piece here, I'm cutting it all the way out. So I'm just going to start on the bottom right corner on this score line, and I am going to cut this little tab right out. Now, when I'm cutting into my score lines, when I'm making boxes, I like to cut at a very slight angle to create just the tiniest little wedge. And I do that because it helps the box come together a little bit easier. So our next score line, I'm just cutting along this score line up to the horizontal score line. So again, I'm just going to cut it at a very slight angle up to the score line. I'm going to cut that little wedge out. And then I'm going to do the same here. I'm just cutting up to that top score line, just at a slight angle to create a tiny little wedge. Okay, next, on my last score line on this side, I'm just cutting up to the score line again. All right, so now our paper looks like so. All right, I'm going to flip it around and I'm going to do some more cutting. Okay, so this side I'm going to cut up to the second score line, and I'm going to take that whole piece out. So I'm cutting past the first score line all the way to the second, and then I'm going to cut that right out, like so. Okay, next I'm going to cut up to the second score line again. So I've gone down to my second score line on this side. I'm cutting all the way up to that second score line at a slight wedge. I'm going to do the same thing at the third score line, cutting it right up to that second score line. And then this gets a little bit tricky, but I'm going to fold that up and I'm going to cut this piece right out. Now, this is a little more awkward because I've got paper on both sides, but it's totally doable. Just take your time. If you need to pause this video, then go ahead and do that and catch up and press play again. All right, so I've cut that whole section out. And then my last score line, I'm going to cut up to the second score line. Again, just at a very slight angle. And I'm taking this piece out as well. All right, so now our paper looks like this. Oh, I'll get that in the camera view better. Sorry about that. Okay, so I'm going to move my template out of the way. And now what I want to do is just fold all my score lines so they are nice and flat. So I'm just using my bone folder for this. I find it helps to create nice flat folds. All right. Now, before I put this together, these two pieces here where we cut out that entire middle section, these are going to create that top fold of your carton. So this is totally optional, but I'm going to use this punch and I'm just going to make a fancy little edge on the flaps of my carton. Totally optional. If you don't want to do this, you don't have to. Now this punch, it's called I think it's called the Very Best Trio. It could be wrong. Last I checked, it was in the clearance section of Stampin' Up. And what's important to know about this punch is if you want your corners to be the same on each side, you actually have to flip your cardstock around. Otherwise, they're not going to match up. So sometimes I forget with this punch and I don't tend to use it as much because of that reason. But I've done it correctly so you can see that these are going to match up. All right, so that's out of the way. Now I want to grab my tear and tape, and I'm going to put a strip of tear and tape on this little tab on the end. So once I do that, our card box is going to come together just by folding over onto that tab. So this makes assembling our box really easy. I just find the edge of my tape here. We'll get going. There we go. All right, so I'm just going to put a strip of tear and tape and then pull that off. I usually use my take your pick tool to grab these backings, but I don't know where I'd put it. Okay, so I've got my tear and tape here. I'm going to fold my box over like this, tear and tape here, and now I'm going to fold this tab over and it's going to stick to that tear and tape. So I just want to make sure I have everything lined up before I commit, but if I've done my scoring correctly, it should fit together perfectly. All right, I'm just going to push down on that, and there we go. Okay, so you might find it easier to glue on your pattern paper before the box is all put together. I like to just partially put it together, so to me it seems easier especially if your paper is directional. I find that the easiest way. So I'm going to glue my bigger piece of designer series paper, and again, this is 3 3/4 by 4, and then my smaller piece will be on the side panels of this box. All right, and this piece is 1.5 by 4. All right, I'm gonna grab my multi-purpose liquid glue. Uh-oh, let me grab another one. This one is, it's either empty or just not working. All right, well, I don't have another glue, but I do have some Stampin' Seal. I'm going to use that. I typically prefer to use my liquid glue, but I can make do with Stampin' Seal. So with Stampin' Seal, you just want to make sure you have it lined up exactly where you want it, because you don't have that wiggle room. So I think for me, I think I've mistakenly cut my paper a little bit too big. I just need to shave a little bit off this edge. This is not 1.5. I'm just going to quickly make that change. There we go. It was just 1/4 inch too big. All right, now Stampin' Seal or multi-purpose liquid glue, whatever you choose. And I'm just going to add that to the panel here. Okay, now I can flip this over and I can do the same thing to the back side of my box. Well, I will say one thing about Stampin' Seal, it's quick. Okay, now side panel. If you have trouble with Stampin' Seal getting that tape to roll, I highly recommend a silicone craft sheet. It really helps for gripping that Stampin' Seal, and you can get it to start rolling much easier that way. So before I glue the bottom of this box together, I'm just going to line up my tabs, and I'm going to take a hole punch. I'm going to line the tabs up and I'm folding them over. So I'm just going to make sure that they are fitting together nicely. I've folded them over like a milk carton, and then I'm going to punch 2 holes right through all 4 layers of cardstock. I don't need those holes too far apart, maybe 3/4 of an inch apart. So now I've got holes through here and holes through the box, and that's where I'm going to thread a ribbon once everything's put together. Okay, so now just need a little scrap of white paper, and I'm going to do a little bit of stamping and coloring with Stampin' Blends. I'm going to move this box out of the way. Okay, so from the Potions and Spells stamp set, I have got the little spell books. I'm just going to stamp those in Tuxedo Black. And I've also grabbed the crow. I'm going to stamp him in Tuxedo Black as well. And then while I'm stamping, I've got a scrap piece of fresh Freesia cardstock, and I'm going to stamp the Happy Halloween sentiment in gorgeous grape ink right onto that fresh Freesia. Okay. That's all I need for stamping. I'll get that out of the way. So for the spell books, I'm going to color them in using fresh Freesia, and lemon lime twist. So I'm just using my light fresh Freesia for the top spell book. Give that a quick color in. And then I'm going to grab my light lemon lime on the brush tip, and I'm going to color in that bottom spell book. All right, now I'm going to take my dark fresh Freesia with the bullet tip, and I'm just going to add in a little bit more color to the binding of the book. And then this top book just above the lemon lime potions book, I'm just going to color in the edges of that book with my dark fresh Freesia. All right, and then with my dark lemon lime, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to color in some of the binding on the spell book, and then that book directly underneath it, I'm just going to give it some color on the edges of the book. Okay, now for the crow, I have got my dark peach pie that I'm going to use for his legs and his little feet, as well as his beak, or her. I don't know if it's a he or a she. All right, so I'm using the bullet tip because there's not a lot of space. I'm going to use Poppy Parade for the tiny little space on the inside of its mouth. And then for its body, I have got a dark smoky slate with the bullet tip. I'm just going to do a little outlining alongside the top of his head, down to his tail feathers, and along his belly. And then I'll just very quickly color in where his little feathers are with the dark. And then when I take the light smoky slate, that's all going to blend together. I'm going to use my brush tip. I find it, well, actually, I will use my brush tip, but first, right around his eye and his beak, I'm going to use the bullet tip because I don't want my color to bleed. And that's just too close to other colors. So now I will use my brush tip, and I'm going to color in the rest of the crow. I'm just going to pull that color down the image, and while I'm doing that, the Stampin' Blend does its magic, and it just blends in the dark along with the light that I'm applying now. And if it looks a little bit patchy, it's just because it's wet, and once it dries, typically if you go over your image twice with your light, those colors should blend together and dry like you won't even notice your brush lines. All right, so if you want the crow's eye just a tiny bit darker to stand out, you can just take a black Stampin' Write marker and add a little more ink to his eye, and I just feel that makes his eye pop out a little bit more. All right, so now what you want to do is you want to take a banner die. If you have the Happy Little Things dies, this banner fits the Happy Halloween sentiment perfectly. And then there's dies for the crow and the spell book. So go ahead and either die cut those out or fussy cut them, whatever you like. I've already cut out pre-colored images just to save some time. So if you are crafting along, just press pause and fussy cut or die cut, whatever works for you. Okay, so now we can add to the front of our box our images, and you can either pop them up with dimensionals, which I think I'm going to do, or you can just glue them right down, whatever you like. All right, I know this is a lot of dimensionals for these books, but I've committed, I'm just going to do it. All right, so I'm going to put the books on the bottom of my curtain, and then I'm going to pop this little crow up right beside the books. So I'm going to grab some mini dimensionals just to put one right on his feet because they're a little bit too small for a full-size dimensional. I'm missing my Take Your Pick tool because it's so handy to pull the backings off with it. I'm going to have to find it after this video. All right, so I'm just popping the crow up, and now I'm going to add my sentiment onto my gorgeous grape layer. Now this gorgeous grape layer is 3 inches by 3/4 of an inch, so 3 by 3/4. This Happy Halloween banner is pretty skinny, so I'm going to use my mini dimensionals again. I'm just going to put 3 on, and then I'm going to pop up my sentiment right in the middle of this gorgeous grape layer. All right. I'm going to just, because my multi-purpose glue isn't working, I'm just going to add a strip of tear and tape. Normally I would glue this down with my multi-purpose glue, but I think it's empty and I wasn't prepared. So I'm just going to use my tear and tape. It works just fine. And I'm going to add this right about there. All right, so that's the front of our card. Now what I want to do is just put the bottom of the box together like that. So I'm going to start by adding some tear and tape or multi-purpose liquid glue or Stampin' Seal, whatever you choose, right onto this flap. All right, very handy if you have your Take and Pick tool because you will be able to pull that backing off much easier than I am right now with my nails. Okay, so I've got the tape on this bottom flap. I'm just going to tuck it in, and I'm going to take my side tabs and I'm going to fold them over so they connect to that tear and tape. And I'm just going to be careful because I don't have any wiggle room with my tear and tape. I just want to make sure that everything's coming together evenly. And then I'm going to just stick my hand in this box. It's big enough that you can do that. And I'm going to put a little bit of pressure down there so the tear and tape sticks. Now, if your hand doesn't fit, then you can just use a bone folder, just put it inside the box and press down a little bit, and then that tape is going to stick really well. All right, next I'm going to glue the bottom, last piece we have, just against these two little tabs we just glued down. So I'm just going to add tear and tape right to the last flap. If I can get my fingers in there. All right. I'm going to use the tip of my scissors to get this backing off. Actually, that works really well. All right. Now I'm just folding this over. And the same thing, I'm going to give it a little bit of pressure so that tear and tape sticks. My hand fits, so I'm going to put that in, and I'm just pushing on the bottom of the box gently and making sure everything is stuck together well. All right, so now all we need to do is just thread some ribbon through the hole punches to close up our box. So whatever ribbon you have works just fine. I've got some, what am I using? Iridescent ribbon that I just had kicking around. But I do have some silver edged ribbon that would be really pretty with this as well. Or even if you have the gingham ribbon. That would look really nice with this as well. So I'm just going to twist the edge of my ribbon. And I'm going to try to get it to go through that hole. Now here's where the take your pick tool would be so handy. Oh, here it is. I found it. It was on my, I had thrown it in a paper pumpkin box. So this will be really handy for poking this ribbon through these small little holes. If you have a bigger hole punch than I do, you won't struggle as much as I'm struggling right now. So I'm just going to work an edge of that ribbon through that hole, pull it through. Now the other edge of the ribbon, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to bunch it up, and then I'm going to try to thread it through that hole. Sometimes it works really well just like that, where I can grab an edge and pull it through. And then I'm just going to make sure my ribbon's not twisted. So when I pull it through at the back, it's not in a little knot. And then I'm just going to tie a loose bow, not too tight because I don't want to rip my holes. And I've got tons of ribbon here, so I'm going to be doing a little bit of trimming. All right, so you can have your bow as big as you want. I'm going to just tighten up my little bow loops, just a smidge, and then manipulate how that ribbon hangs down just by holding on to the knot of the bow and pulling gently on the tail ends of the ribbon. And then when I have it where I want it, I think that's good. I'm going to trim a little bit. I do want some overhang, so I won't make it too short, but you do you. All right, so that's it. That is our Halloween carton treat box. You can stuff a lot of Halloween sized treats in here. So I hope you guys really enjoy this project. If you make it, please share a photo. I love to see what you make. And we'll just do a little recap with all the projects for this series. So we started out with this very simple card that was stamping, Stampin' Blends, and a little bit of blending. And then there's Wink Castella on the bubbles, but it's very hard to see in the video. And then a little glow up on Frankenstein, a smaller treat box that is super simple and easy to put together. It is not complicated for cutting. And then our curtain box, which is a little bit more hard to cut, but it's still doable. So thanks everybody for tuning in. I do hope you enjoyed this series. And tune in next month for my next free card class at home, which will be Christmas themed. Hey, thanks very much. I hope you enjoyed this project.